Very good morning, everyone, and a very warm welcome. This is Priyal Bhatia, the Chief Community Officer for DPO Club, and it is our pleasure to have you all join us for a webinar today on DPIAs without a rulebook, practical approaches for businesses. As organizations now increasingly rely on personal data, identifying and addressing privacy risk has now become essential. DPIAs as a process helps organizations to make informed decisions, to reduce privacy risk and build trust system by embedding privacy into business processes. So today, to throw more light on the same, we have an expert panel here. So our speaker today is Mr. Prashanth Shivadass, partner at Shivadass and Shivadass, who brings extensive experience in privacy law and regulatory compliance. Welcome, Prashanth.
Thank you, Priyal. Good afternoon. It's 5 minutes past 12.
And our moderator today is Mr. Bhaskara Nand Shukla, who is director at Tsaaro People Consulting, who will be guiding today's discussion. So without any further ado, I hand over the forum to Bhaskar to kick off the session today. Over to you, Bhaskar.
Everyone, and welcome to as we know, India's Digital Personal Data Protection Act has introduced a fresh accountability framework. It has also left many organizations asking a very practical question: how do we actually conduct a data protection impact assessment? Unlike its European counterpart, which is DPR, India has not yet prescribed a detailed methodology for DPIAs. But does that mean businesses should sit on hands and wait, or should they start building practical frameworks today? To help us understand this, to help us unpack this, we are joined by Mr. Prashanth Shivadass, partner at Shivadass Shivadass Law Office. Prashanth, thank you for being with us today.
My pleasure, Bhaskar. Thank you for the invitation.
Yes, Prashanth. I was saying, let's dive right in with the core question that we have.
Sure.
I think, yeah. So my very question to you is, in the absence of a prescribed frame from regulators today, how should organizations think about DPIAs right now?
I think to start with, I should say that DPIA as a concept is a very European concept. So I don't think it will apply as is to how we're going to look at data in India. But what I would recommend that we do is, I think we start with identifying what is the data that we have now. Why am I collecting this data? And this is the basic mantra that you can have for not just DPIA, for any kind of assessment. So I'll start with what is the data that I have? Why do I collect that data? How do I process that data? And where do I store that data? This is the basic fulcrum of any kind of impact assessment that I do. And the concept of assessment comes after I understand this information that I have. So what do I assess by utilizing all of this information that I get? I probably have to assess, is there a need for me to have so much information in the first place? Or can I reduce the amount of information that I collect? Can I minimize the amount of information that I collect? Is there some technology advancement that has happened which will enable me to reduce the amount of information that I collect? So this is something that you don't need any kind of framework for this. This is something that everybody ordinarily also does generally. DPIA for India as of now, it applies only for significant data fiduciaries. But if I have to keep that definition aside, and everybody needs to do this going forward, I think everybody should follow this kind of a very basic framework to kind of understand what's going on within their company, and what I should do to be able to assess what's happening within my company, and how I should reduce the burden or the liability that I can have in terms of storage of data. So I think that's the basic framework that everybody should follow.
Sure. Thank you, Prashant, for that. So, as you said, a lot of organizations we talk about, or a lot of organizations that we talk to, they believe they only need to worry about DPIs once the detailed line by line rules are officially issued. And that should not be the case, as you said, right? Now, is this a dangerous assumption altogether? Like from a legal and governance perspective, what risks are companies taking by playing this waiting game rule?
See, truth be told, I've been hearing about this. We'll wait for the data protection law and the rules to come out since 2022. Initially, they said we'll wait for the law to come. Then, when the law came, they said we'll wait for the rules to come. Now that the rules are here, everybody is like, no, we'll wait to see how it is actually implemented in the future, and we probably need more guidelines from the MITI and the government and how to go about it and all of that. You can't wait for the government or the MITI to give you any of these details or information, because at the end of the day, you're not dealing with the government generally. Government at the end of the day and courts at the end of the day are only going to monitor what you've already done. You're dealing at the end of the day with a data principle, and if you're building a trust building activity with a data principle, this is a trust building exercise that you have to undergo with a data principle for a long time, right? So if you have to build that trust with the data principle, you need to get the data principle on your side at the end of the day. So waiting and watching to see how it is going to be implemented, or let's see in May 2027, as and when the notice and the privacy and the consent and DPIA rules come out and all of that, that's not going to help you in any way whatsoever. Because come to think of it, today we are what, 6 8 months since the rules came in. Yeah, 8 months since the rules came in. Some portion of the act and the rules are already implemented. Some portions will be implemented in December this year, and the whole bunch of the major chunk will be implemented in May 20, I think 2027 next year, right? Now, if you're going to say that, oh, I don't know whether I'm even going to be a significant data fiduciary, for instance, because that's how DPIA is going to be involved in the Indian bracket. I'm going to wait till I'm classified as a significant data fiduciary. I don't even know if I'm going to be a significant data fiduciary. Let that classification first happen, and then I will figure out whether DPIA. That's too late. That's far too late for anybody to figure out what. In fact, I would stop short by saying that even if you're not a significant data fiduciary, you still need to do some kind of an assessment, because on May 1st, 2027, let us assume these other provisions of consent and privacy policy and all of that is live. On May 2nd, somebody can still file a complaint against you, right? It's a different thing whether the DP board is actually operational at that point of time. Today, the DP board provisions are enforced, but we don't know. Members have to be selected. It has to start working, and all of those things are still there. But assuming for a moment those things are in place by then, on May 2nd, somebody can still file a complaint against you. At that point of time, the data protection law is not going. Data protection law today says that you should be compliant by then already. If you're not compliant by then and somebody files a complaint against you, you have a penalty that is going to stand against you. Whether that complaint is right or wrong is a different question altogether, right? Your endeavor as a data fiduciary should always be that that complaint is frivolous, because I am at least 60 or 70% compliant by May 1st, 2027. So that should be the goal. So the goal, ideally, according to me, should not be let's wait to see what happens. The goal should be that let's start working as a process, as a tool. Let's look at our systems. Let's look at what's happening inside. Start gaining the trust of the data principle. Let's assume to see what we can do better, in our own context, in our own way, to ensure that that customer doesn't leave me, that the customer doesn't go and file a complaint against me, because you're looking at a reputational damage tomorrow, which is far worse than just one complaint that can come before the data protection board. So I think this wait and watch game, which I've observed over the last 3 to 4 years, I don't think that should be the policy anymore. You're looking at a harsher, not just penalties aside, that's different. I mean, that courts can decide on whether the 250 crore penalty is right, wrong, whether it should be leviable for this activity or not. That's a different question altogether. But you're losing your the trust and your reputation in the process all the way up the chain while you're battling this in court. So to negate all of that, I think you should start the process now, and you should ensure that you're at least 60 to 70 compliant by the time the law catches in May 27. So governance now takes shape before the law will catch up as and when it is implemented.
No, thank you for that, Prashant. I think as a privacy professional, I really appreciate how well you have explained the principle of accountability and the regulatory expectations. Like tying together two of the important questions, and these are also like my follow-up questions to you now. First is like, is general accountability enough to justify doing DPIs today? And second is like, if a security, as you mentioned about the complaints, so if a security incident or data breach occurs tomorrow, what evidence would regulators expect a company to produce regarding its risk assessment?
See, there are two things. Accountability is one. If I'm today wrong about something, I can stand up and say I'm wrong, right? But that doesn't solve the problem. So that's where DPIA comes in, right? DPIA is a process which goes one step further and says the purpose of DPIA is completely different. The purpose of DPIA is not only to assess what problems you have, and that problem could have already led to some form of a complaint or something else, but to stand up and say, hey, I am accountable, yes, I am liable, that's not an answer. The answer is, what do I do in the future to ensure that that doesn't happen again? And that's where your DPIA will come into play, because your assessments will help you understand where you're wrong, where you need to tweak your systems, where your security systems need to go up, where I can enhance my technology to ensure that I don't need to collect, if I have to collect XYZ details today to do a certain activity or a service for you, I need to be able to ensure that I use adequate amount of technology to ensure that I collect only X detail. I don't need to collect Y and Z details, right? So to that extent, I think DPIA will help in trying to assess and help people understand, what do I do? Because when you say I collect maximum amount of data and I need maximum amount of data for me to monetize certain activities, etc., I think it's high time I think people also start understanding that maximum amount, your ability to innovate in the market will be appreciated more if you collect minimal amount of data and still try to maximize on your profits, right? So I think that's where the technology and the privacy folks and everybody need to sit down together and say, hey, you know what, if I have to do, let's only have your phone number maybe to do a delivery. Why do I need a name and an address also? That I don't know how technology works, and you guys will be in a better position to understand how technology has grown over the last 10 years or so. Maybe we don't need delivery addresses anymore, maybe we don't need phone numbers anymore to be able to deliver a certain product. Having said that, you can have a very liberal view in terms of how one aspect of a person, because your personal information today is defined to say how it is identifiable to a certain person, right? Unless I know the name Bhaskar, unless I know his photograph, and unless I know his phone number and email ID and put all of it together, I can't tie it to a Bhaskar, right? Just a random 10 digit phone number will not identify that phone number to Bhaskar tomorrow. So I can take that liberal approach. So in terms of a regulator, I will always say, first show your bona fides, right? You need to be able to convince the regulator tomorrow that I have done everything in my power to ensure that everything is as per law and as per the requirement that you have pointed out. If anything is beyond my control, then there's something that's beyond my control. That's how force majeure as a concept also started, right? If there's something that's beyond your control, that's when force majeure kicks in. So I would need to first ascertain. So I need to sit down and figure out where my data is flowing within my company. I need to have an audit trail of how the data flows within my company, who has access to data within my company. I create maybe quarterly reviews, or bi-monthly or bi-weekly reviews. I don't know, it depends on the kind of compliance that a company wants to undertake, right? So I have quarterly reviews, I have monthly reviews, I create reports, I keep those reports handy, I tighten the snooze with data processors, I try to understand what they are doing, where they're storing, how they're using the data. So I amp up my security systems, I amp up and see how my breach controls are going to work tomorrow, right? I have to possibly see where my encryption and decryption tools are going out, because some of the laws in these areas of decryption, encryption, and all of that are slightly outdated even in India today, right? You still go back to a 2011 or a 2016 or a 2017, cert verifications and all of that, and your BIS controls of 2017. Today we are in 2026. Those 2017 BIS and cert tools are not beneficial at all today, right? You need to up your game as an entity yourself, And then you can always tell a regulator tomorrow that, I have done everything in my part. These are things that are beyond my control. Therefore, look at things rather loosely rather than, in a very strict nature. So that will help companies figure out how they want to go ahead and tackle things with, the regulators as well. So accountability is one that goes a long way in showing your bona fides. But insofar as what you should do, DPIA has a very specific purpose. And I think I will use DPIA internally also within my firm to see how I can ensure that this DPIA is used in the future to ensure that those instances don't happen again. So I wouldn't tie accountability and simply say, okay, just because I'm accountable, I will not do a DPIA, right? So there are two very different things that operate differently.
And definitely, I agree with you and completely. I think, like, in addition to being a compliance exercise, it also, like, DPIA also allows us to, as you said, identify and fix problems at an early stage. And more than that, they also serve a lot of potential benefits. Like, they help us build our reputation and relationships with the individuals. Conducting a DPIA can also help us build trust and engagement with the people using our services. So I
Correct.
completely agree with you and see those points. Now, I would like us to move from this theory that we have discussed just now about the data protection impact assessments, the DPIAs. Let's move from this theory to the execution of into how of a DPIA. So, if a company approached you tomorrow to conduct a DPIA, where would you begin? Like, what are the essential components? What do you need for an effective DPIA?
I would start by identifying what data I have today first, right? I would not venture into, making a table, making a proper DPIA study, and those things are, slightly later. I would first start by identifying what data I have today, who has access to that data today, right? This exercise, 90% of the people who have come to me have not done. Just identifying the data that I have today, that I possess today, is not done by 90% of the people who have not come. So I would first start with that. Then I would see who has access, who has control, and where it is stored. These are the three key features that I would do insofar as identifying what the data is and where the data is. Purpose and all of that will come to slightly later, because the law kicks in 2027. Up until 2027, most companies did not even have a privacy policy. Let's assume that. That's the worst case scenario that we will assume, right? So most companies did not have privacy policies. So they obviously did not go and seek consent from a customer or a data principal to say, hey, I'm going to be using your data for XYZ things, and this is the purpose for which I'm going to use. Nobody has done that. So let's assume nobody has done that. So if that was the case, I would have to trace, and the company has been, let's assume, in existence for 10 years. So I have 10 years worth of data and I have no idea what this data is, right? So I'll first start with data mapping as a process, just to understand what this data is, who has access to this data, both internally and externally, right? Now, internally, I need to know which team, which employee, who has access to this data, whether it is encrypted or not encrypted first. Because if you're looking at, we don't have a definition for sensitive anymore, right? So if you're looking at sensitive personal data, that's something that you have to be more careful about. So you need to do this internally first, and then you need to start asking the people that you outsource to, Mr. If you have all of this data, one, please give me a list of what data you have. And two, please tell us where you've stored that data, whether you stored that data in India, outside India, whether you have servers on your own, or whether you've tied up with somebody else outside of India to be able to store that data, so on and so forth, right? Then I would begin the process of actually seeing what was the reason and what was the consent that I had taken to get this data from Bhaskar. So let's assume Bhaskar pops up in my system today saying that I have Bhaskar's name, I have Bhaskar's date of birth, I have Bhaskar's phone number, I have Bhaskar's email ID. So okay, this is the basic detail that I've got. Now I will go back and see what is the service that Bhaskar had subscribed to me for, right? Has he in the last 10 years, 12 years, 5 years, 3 years reached out to me again for that service? If he has not reached out to me again for that service, I'll probably ping in and tell him, hey, Bhaskar, I have this information with you. Would you like to continue this service with me? If not, I'm going to delete your data. So there one chunk of data of Bhaskar just leaves my system and moves away, right? Or if he says no, I want you to keep this data with me, then I would now tell him, okay, I will use your data for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 things, and now start bucketing it and tabling it and putting it in different DPIA formats, just to understand that Bhaskar has given consent to use of his name and date of birth. He has asked me to use this information only for this specified purpose, and after that I don't need his details. So if this process is aligned, and then I get into, which of the teams within the company has access to this information, and then how the data processor is using this information, and thereafter I start mapping this properly. That's the second step of the exercise that needs to be done. So if a company comes to me today, I'm going to tell the company first, please first sit down and figure out what is the data that you have, and where and how, who has access to this data. That's the basic step that every company should start with today. And then the step 2 will come with DPIA and the flows and the formats and the data mapping and all of that. That's a secondary step that the company will have to do.
Great. I think, yeah. And again, I completely agree with those points. So in essence, I think what I gathered from that discussion is like DPIA also helps us in complying with all the privacy principles, be it
Absolutely.
yeah. So
Absolutely. See,
yeah.
if you have, and legislations all over the world have the same principles, right? I mean, data principles have not changed. The principle of a data protection framework has not changed just because data is moved from Europe to US to India, right? You still follow those 3, 4 basic broad principles, which is purpose limitation, data minimization, and so on and so forth, right? Those concepts you can still, you can have, if tomorrow, assuming, and that's what I keep telling people, because people keep saying, I want the government to give me a structure for, a DPIA as part of the rules and all of that. Tomorrow, if the government does not give you anything at all, right, you simply follow these 4 principles of how data protection framework has to work, and you implement your own DPIA format if you want. No, honestly, nobody will care if you've done your homework in terms of how the DPIA should be structured, and as long as you follow the the principles, it should be more than enough. So this logic that I need some answer from somewhere is not a solution to any problem. You can, like you rightly pointed out, your basic principles of data protection framework is more than enough for you to have your own DPIA framework.
No, definitely. I think that should be the case. That should how we are going to approach it, and most of the organizations should like prepare a roadmap for DPIs in the similar pattern. It shouldn't be limited to what has already come out. It should be proactive when it comes to protection of personal data. Now, another related piece, somewhat related piece, is conducting a DPIA. Like, when should we conduct a DPIA? Because uh, looking at the global counterparts and the guidelines provided by the data protection authorities worldwide, mostly DPIAs were recommended for high risk activities, which were based on likelihood and impact, all those factors. Now, in India, DPIAs have been, as you mentioned early on in this session, in the DPIAs have been made mandatory for significant data fiduciaries. But should DPIAs be conducted for all the data processing activities, or strictly for the high risk processing?
If you ask me, if I'm a customer of a certain entity, and in an ideal world, I would say yes, please do DPIAs for all activities that you do. But that's practically impossible, right? And it's not feasible also, because if I'm simply asking you for your phone number, I don't need your name and address and anything to be able to just do a service for you. I'm really not collecting personal information from you at all in the first place, right? It's not identifiable to you. Just 10 digits of a mobile phone is not identifiable to you in any way. So I would still go by that logic of high risk, and there's a thought process behind that high risk definition that Europe has, right? Now, whether that definition is the best definition, I would argue otherwise. But for now, since that, and that's how Indian conceptual regulators also have started. If you look at how IRDA is regulated, if you look at how the banking and insurance banking and insurance sector is curated now, possibly even healthcare systems tomorrow is going to be curated. These are regulated sectors for a reason, right? Because they collect that kind of high risk information from people, right? you're looking at health data, you're looking at, these are the most personal data associated with a certain individual, right? Like a hospital that collects the data from me, collects my blood group, my fingerprints, my biometrics, my urine samples, my lung reports, my whatever, you can call it whatever you want to, but those are the most high risk essential factors of an individual's body or a mind that a hospital collects. Same is the case for the financial sector as well, right? We have so many applications on our phone, banking applications on our phone, which are now just by facial recognition and all of that, that you can just point out and do. So there's a reason why they're high risk, and there's a reason why those are subject to maximum amount of accountability. So I would definitely say yes, do a DPIA if you're in the high risk sector. But if you want to be a little conservative, and if you want to say that no, I still want to do an assessment because I'm a large collector of information anyway, right? There are so many entities today which do not do high risk activities but still have a lot of information that they collect, right? And they, because they are very wide known and well known and widespread entities, etc., you may still not classify as a significant data fiduciary, but you still may have a lot of information that you collect from various people, right? So if you are in that space as well, I would still conservatively say please do a data protection impact study anyway, just to be able to assess where you're at and how you want to approach in this space in the future. But definitely I would say that if you're high risk, do it. If you're medium risk, and that's a new coin, that's a new term I'm going to coin now, if you're medium risk, then you still do it conservatively anyway. But otherwise you don't have to really be worried about this. And if you're a regulated entity, you're anyway subject to whatever the regulatory frameworks are there for you. So most of the high risk in India are already protected. I don't see a need for a special kind of DPIA. The high risk entities already do this activity because your regulatory entities want you to do it anyway. So I think we're very well set for the data protection act to kick in 2027, and these kinds of allied frameworks are also helping a lot of the entities structure how they want to do the DPIAs.
No, very well. I think very well put, because you've exactly given the suggestion which is needed to balance that compliance against business values, that the leaders actually point out while we talk about these compliance frameworks. Because many business leaders, they view DPIAs as like it's just another tedious exercise which will disrupt the operations, that will slow down the product launch, deployment, and operations, all the other things. So I think, and the next question will also be related to this particular part. How do we change that mindset across the C-suites and the boardrooms? Because that is one of the most important and crucial places where we have to get the buy-in. But yeah, again,
See, between the time, I remember both of us, we were on the first panel for Nama Privacy when it happened in Bangalore. Between that time and now, believe me, boardrooms are actually concerned about how this legislation is going to framework. Back then, when we were on a panel, and way back in 2022 or 2023, I think that was, boardrooms are still not very concerned about how data protection law is going to framework. In fact, they were not even willing to invest. They were calling anything allied towards data protection in terms of framework, infrastructure, or conducting a DPIA study to be an expense. Right now, that term from expense has moved to an investment option. Right, people are now thinking, acha, okay, this is something that I really have to do, and it is going to benefit me in the future. So I think that notion has moved from who wants to do this to, okay, let's do this. So I think that's a positive start that we have today in 2026 when we're sitting down and having this discussion. But more or less, I think the C suits have not really pictured and understood what is the impact that this investment is going to have. And that's where I would start, when if somebody walks up to me even before saying you do a DPIA study, I'm going to tell them, please go up to your board and do like a proper pitch plan with the board to say that, okay, if you're going to invest 1 crore in an entire data protection segment within the company, be it a business model, be it a marketing tool, be it a legal service, or be it an offshoot legal service, whatever you want to call it, if you invest 1 crore today, this is the ROI that you're going to have in the next 5 years or 6 years. That's the best way to rope in the board to say that I'm going to do this. So I'm going to start, you should start with that first. To get the, if you're saying I'm going to build trust outside of the organization, I would start with building trust within the organization first. And then look at expanding this to outside the organization to say that, hey, you know what, I've done this internally. This is the checks and balance I have internally. And this is the checks and balance that I'm going to have tomorrow when it comes to a data principle or when it comes to a data processor. Right. So I'm going to start with that first to get the board to first trust me. Appointing, not appointing a DPO, now, later, all that, those are questions that the board, because you don't need to have a DPO today, right? The law also says that significant data fiduciary must have a DPO. But if you're not a significant data fiduciary, it's not compulsory for you to have a DPO, but it's unavoidable at the end of the day, right? I mean, you can't have a legal person sitting there and be like, no, you operate as a DPO also. You can't have a board member come and sit there saying that you operate as a DPO also, or a managing director of a company saying you operate as a DPO also. That's not feasible. It's not materially right also for somebody else to be running this show also on this side. So I think that's inevitable that you have a DPO eventually on board. But a larger question also is, today the marketing and the business teams, from my conversation with clients that I've had, are the most in terms of मुझे दुनिया का data चाहिए, right? They don't really sit down to assess and see why I need this data from, because for them, marketing and for the marketing and business teams, the larger the audience, the better it is for them to get subscribers and people to come on board and people to follow their application, or to feel people to come and buy stuff from their module or whatever is the website that they have playing around with them. So their goal is very little. They're going with blinders in their eyes, right? That's when the legal has to step in and say, hey, you know what, let's put a full stop to this at some point of time, right? We need to do this organically. We need to be able to understand how we need to collect data. If a person says unsubscribe, please unsubscribe. Please don't keep sending him again and again and say that, are you sure you want to unsubscribe and all that. No, it's an unsubscribe. There's an unsubscribe for a reason. So stop with that, right? The other thing that people really haven't figured out, and I don't blame anybody for not having figured out, is children's data. Nobody has figured this out. Nobody will for the foreseeable future also be able to figure it out, because it's the most complicated aspect of data protection that is there. And world over, this is the same problem. So it's not that Indian entities haven't been able to figure it out. World over, everybody is struggling to figure out how to handle and tackle this children data. So either you go, the extreme step and say anyone below the age of 18 banned, right? I will not give you access to any information. You will not have to have access to social media. For instance, there are some states in India that have already done it. There are countries that have done, saying that, people below the age of 18 or people below the age of 16 will not have access to any kind of social media, for instance, right? So there's a blanket ban on that kind of activity for those kinds of for those children. So either we do that extreme, or we say, let's try and see how we can blend this model to say that, there's a verifiable where parental consent, age gating has to be done at some point of time. Then you get this extra information of a two-step verification process. You store that data also. Again, that's a compliance headache for a lot of people to have. So what we do is we should try and figure out how to monitor, because we are at a very at the society is at a pinnacle point for us, where the maximum and the largest audience of Gen Z is in India today, right? And Gen Z in India today has, I would say, potentially the maximum in terms of an iPad or a phone coverage, or in terms of adaptability to these kinds of scenarios, where you utilize AI tools and all of that, even in classrooms going forward. So when you have that big chunk of society living in India, you can't say, I'm going to ban everything for you guys. That's impractical also, right? So I think that blend of children's data is something that most people have to figure out. And that's where I think the board also starts getting a little disturbed, because they don't know what kind of information that they're dealing with and who are the people that they're dealing with. So I would think getting people on board with an ROI sort of a pitch plan, especially to the board, is the first thing that most companies will have to do, right? They need to sit down, they need to make that initial investment just to be able to say that, okay, 5 years down the line or 7 years down the line, this is the benefit that I'm going to get out of this investment today. And I would definitely say, please don't call this an expense. Please start investing in this actively so that you will have some kind of a return tomorrow.
No, I agree. Yeah, I think while you were describing like how to get that buy-in, we also got a similar question in the chat box. I would like to just refer to that question.
Sure, sure.
Yeah. So there's one question like there's no clarity about the significant data fiduciary, and the second question says that since there's no clarity, how do we convince the fintech organizations to invest in that SDF readiness? Because DPIA is also one of the parts of that, right? So
Correct.
how do we convince? I think that they've also asked a similar question. Since there's no clarity on SDF,
I honestly, I wouldn't say there is no clarity on significant data fiduciary definition. I'll tell you why. I mean, the DPDP framework is part of a larger Digital India Act, right? So the Digital India Act is supposed to have 3 or 4 different legs. Whether it is going to happen or not, I don't know. Nobody knows. But for now, the plan is to have DPDP as part of the Digital India Act. There's going to be a separate digital competition bill as part of that Digital India Act. And there's also going to be something known as an AI regulation. I mean, it was supposed to be an AI regulation. It's now working as a small framework for a certain sector. But there is hopefully some kind of an AI regulation, and we're getting mixed response whether you should have a regulation or not have a regulation and whatever. The digital competition bill that was floated in 2023, I think there is a definition for significant data fiduciary in that. So if you're a social media enterprise, you need to have X number of users to qualify as a significant data fiduciary. If you're a healthcare enterprise, then there are certain number of tools or app users or etc. that you need to have to be able to qualify as a significant data fiduciary. You can't say now that I don't have a definition for significant data fiduciary. And if you think about it, if in one legislation it has already been defined, and that legislation is going to be one of the legs to a larger Digital India Act, it is safe to assume that you will have the same kind of definition being applied here as well. I mean, when the government has already applied its mind into a certain kind of a definition for another legislation, it is safe to assume that you can have that kind of a model being followed for this as well, right? And the thought process behind the definition for significant data fiduciary under digital competition bill is also basis the number of users, which is what any significant data fiduciary under any data protection legislation also is going to have, right? So I wouldn't say that there is no definition. Having said that, if you think that you're not going to, because significant data fiduciary there under the Competition Act is basis your own declaration. It's not that the government identifies you as a significant data fiduciary. You declare saying that you are a significant data fiduciary, and the government either says yes or no. But I would assume under the DPDP that the government comes out with a notification and says, we are going to classify 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 people who are significant data fiduciaries, right? So if that happens, well and good. You know for a fact that DPIA is mandatory only for those, let's assume 10 entities if the government comes up with tomorrow. But does that mean that I am not part of those 10, therefore I don't need to do a DPIA? I would say no. I would still go ahead and say that because every entity, if you're operating in the media space, for instance, or if you're operating in the social media space, for instance, your data is a big oil kind of a rule applies when you start getting more users. So eventually you will reach that stage of those 10 entities who are going to be there as part of the notification when it comes out, classifying them as significant data fiduciary. So the rationale is the more number of users that you have, the more likely of you being targeted as a significant data fiduciary, and therefore having a harsher sort of compliance tool, to put it rather crudely. So I would still say that if you're, like I said, if you're a medium enterprise also, I would still recommend conservatively that you still do at least a personal impact assessment study to understand what's going on within the company. It's beneficial for you also tomorrow randomly, it's not necessary that a complaint can come only against a significant data fiduciary before the data protection board, right? A complaint can come against a regular data fiduciary also. So even for you to understand what's going on within your company, I wouldn't need to be classified as a significant data fiduciary to do this study. I would still do it otherwise.
Great. I think, and one more related question has just popped in. DPIA should be done by internal teams or external entities to rule out any bias or conflict of interest, because going forward it will be an annual exercise.
Um, it's a combination of both. So I think you should do the internal data mapping first. Most companies, from what I've seen so far, most companies don't have an internal audit and security team. So they outsource the audit and security framework exercise under the DPIA to, one of the outsourced agencies. They do the study, they come back, they compile it together, and then get help from the legal team to assess whether all of this is right or wrong. But I think the basic framework and the basic study needs to be done by the company themselves, and then you can outsource it to somebody else to do the security and the audit. So you also deal with the conflict of interest problem as well, because you're not the one sitting and doing this. You're just giving them the details that you have, and somebody else from the system and the security standpoint is doing that study, and somebody else from the legal is doing that study. But definitely it's like saying that if I have to do a statutory audit for a company, the company itself is not doing any work. That's not true. The company internally will sit down, compile that data, then give it to a big four for them to do a statutory audit. And there are generally companies follow the two step big four model. One is doing the statutory audit and one is doing the financial audit, right? So the company still works on those activities. So similarly, I think the company will work here also on the study, but they will have 2-3 different agencies doing the outsourced work for them to be able to avoid that conflict of interest problem.
Right. So can it be said like we can conduct the DPIA internally, while for conducting data protection audits, we can invite someone from outside?
Absolutely.
Okay, great. I think that answers one of the next questions also posted on our chat. But yes, moving back to our core topic now here. So have you seen instances where DPIAs actually accelerated decision making rather than bottlenecking it?
I've had 2 clients actually who came to us for doing the DPIA study, and once we pointed out to them that there are severe flaws, they've gone, they've accelerated in the sense that within a week we had a turnaround to say that yes, please conduct the study as soon as possible. But these are 2 clients that have come to us in over 1 year. Everybody else, the minute they come to us and we tell them that these are all the gaps that you have, they've either kept away from doing DPIA for the time being, or they've picked up one essential component from the gaps that we've pointed out, which requires real attention today, and they've said no, please help us with only this portion of it, and rest of it we will deal with later. But largely, I think the problem today is the basic framework that DPDP wants you to do, which is the easiest way for me to give consent and withdraw consent is not there for 90% of the folks, right? Consent is easy to give, but to withdraw, there are 4 steps that I have to take to be able to withdraw that consent. Law today requires you to say the methodology with which you give consent, the ease with which you give consent should be the same ease with which you withdraw consent as well. So the second portion, there is a little bit of a lag for people to commit. So that's one thing that we've noticed, that framework is not there. And privacy policies have become, instead of 10 pages, because DPDP has come into pictures, they've become 25 pages. So now I think we need to start talking to companies and telling people that, hey, you know what, the whole purpose of a privacy policy and a consent notice is gone if everything that you're going to dump in your privacy policy is going to be like this, right? It should be as reader friendly as possible, right? I am a decently educated individual, and I don't read privacy policies today, except when I'm doing work for a client. When I have to download an application, I don't think I have ever read a privacy policy, and I just simply scroll down and press the click wrap tick and move to the next page. So if I, as an individual who's a decently educated individual, is not reading a privacy policy, you can't expect a person who has menial or no education to be able to read that, irrespective of the number of languages that you have. So I think that is where the shift has to happen eventually at some point of time. And the third problem that we've seen is the cookie problem. Everybody suddenly now everybody has realized, oh yes, there is something known as a cookie. And the minute I log on to a website now, everything is enabled. You have your always functional cookies are enabled, the marketing cookies are enabled, everything is enabled. So I have to naturally go and remove those analog buttons for each of the other ones and leave only the strictly functional cookies option open. It should be the other way around. It should be at my consent, I should be able to switch on those tabs. It shouldn't be the other way around. So, and there is also a problem with how these cookie banners are now portrayed on the website or on the tabs, because I don't have an option. Once I've selected and I've said allow, I don't have an option to go back and disallow. So most websites, that seems to be a problem. So these are things that we have seen in buckets for different people. One or two clients have asked us to address all of them, but most of them have asked us to address only pockets of each of these activities.
Right. I think it also somewhere you talked about like clients picking up specific points or high risks identified in the DPIA when addressing those only. So for my next question, it's about the actionable roadmap. I'll try to club 2-3 questions that we have received in the chat box with my next question.
Sure.
So one of the questions in the chat box is, how do we transition a DPIA from a one-off launch artifact into a living document, so that whenever any product launch happens, when change happens, that can be updated. And another piece is like, if a company is trying to embed DPIA into their processes, how can they do so on an ongoing basis? These things. Yeah.
So I have a client who's working on their new website now, right? So the founder of the company just got on a call with me and said, I want to launch a website. Please figure out how you can curate the privacy policy. I said, great, no problem. I said, can we get on a call with the marketing and your business teams, right? So the marketing and the business teams also got onto the call. Marketing team had completely different perspectives of what the website needs to do. The business team had completely different perspectives of what the website needs to do. So if I were to start a website for a company, right, I would want the business and the marketing team to sit down and first say, what is the intent for that website? What do I want that website to do? Do I want that website to give me X number of users a month or X number of clicks a month? Or if it is a website where you can buy and sell commodities, do I want to target X number of customers coming into the website? So what's the goal behind having an application or a website is something that the business and the marketing team needs to sit down, right? Once they figure that out and what is the goal and the intent behind that product is concerned or the service is concerned, then I figure out, okay, if I need somebody to come onto my website, what is the basic information I need from that person, right? Or do I need information at all in the first place? If this is an activity that is done, if this is an activity that can be sourced within the company, then I can have a roadmap to say that, okay, so for my website, I need Bhaskar to not give me any consent whatsoever, right? He can simply log into my website. He can say, I just want functional cookies. So that's my first banner that I can have. He scans through my website because he is able to do that. And if he wants to buy an option or if he wants to check out, etc., is there a way for me to enable an option for Bhaskar to say that Bhaskar can check out of my website without giving me anything except his phone number? Because I need his phone number and information to be able to buy this product and deliver it to a certain to his location at home. So this is a roadmap that gets built for a website, right? Now, in this roadmap for the website, you start tracking what is the information chain or the data chain that happens from start to finish. Then comes the next step, which is creation of an account on a website, right? A lot of companies have this, you create an account, you get, 10% off, 20% off, 30% off, whatever be the case, right? Then you start creating a website. And now for, an account, you need to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 information. There you start doing your age gating. You identify whether they're over 18, under 18. Then you see if they're under 18, is behavioral monitoring tracking off completely? Have I taken verifiable parental consent? then your next step of that verifiable parental consent gets slotted into that DPIA framework to say that, oh, okay, so this person's data is something that I need to store internally, or I should tell the data processor, please don't process this information for anything else, right? It is encrypted all the time. I should take yearly consent from this individual till this individual becomes 18. So this is the data mapping exercise that needs to be done as part of the study every single year for that individual, right? Then once I have information for people above 18 and they've created the account and all of that, then I need to see what is the vital information that I need to save and store, right? 90% of these folks have, some other entity doing the financial activities. It's taken off from your website and it's moved into another person's platform to be able to do, the payment gateway and the checkout and all of that, right? It doesn't necessarily happen on your website unless you have an API integration that's happening on your website as well. So these are some basic things that I should start and flow through as a content. And the prima facie aspect that everybody needs to say is, what do I want out of this? What do I want out of a website? What do I want out of an application? And then start figuring out the legalities behind it.
Great. Thank you for that, Prashanth. I think I'll quickly move on towards the end of the session. I'll last two questions for you.
Sure.
Before we take any further questions from the audience. So we have talked about what needs to be done for a DPIA, how to tackle it, when to do it. And across your professional practice, you would have seen the good, the bad, and the redundant part as well. Now, what do you suggest are the common mistakes you have seen organizations make repeatedly while approaching DPIs, and what needs to be avoided?
I mean, my answer has not changed. I mean, it's been the same. Either I start with, there are a lot of legal teams who come to us and they say that, no, we want to understand how a DPIA works. Can you give a structural format or a flow of how the DPIA works, etc.? And then, we give them a structure and a format and a flow, and they simply place it before the board, and it dies there, right? Because they want to show to the board that, there is some kind of an aspect that we have started in this data protection sphere, but they've not really actioned it out. So that's one mistake that I've seen. I won't call it mistake, but that seems to be a business decision of a company that most companies seem to be taking. There are proactive folks, there are lots of proactive folks who are doing this DPIA study, data mapping, and all of that on a repeated basis. Some companies have already started doing bi-monthly data mapping exercises and studies and audit reports and all of that. Lots of agreements are getting changed with data processors. Liabilities are getting tweaked with data processors. So there has been a positive change as well. But equal proportion is, the hesitancy to move ahead with a DPIA study or a PIA study, probably because the company is not very well placed to be able to afford to do that kind of an activity just yet, right? So I think the balance will improve maybe over the course of this year. Hopefully it does, maybe over the course of this year. And like I said, largely if everybody hopes that they are 70 or 75% compliant with DPDP before the act kicks in next year, that's a good way and that's a good benchmark for us to start off the implementation of the law.
Okay. Since we are towards the end of this session, I will try to take a few questions like rapid fire. Let's try to answer those in a few matter of seconds.
Sure.
Which is a better approach for data discovery, through automated tools or manually?
Manual.
Okay. Now coming to the next one, are there any qualifications for data auditors? Any qualifications?
There are some certifications that you have with some European entities or even Indian entities, but I don't think a certification is absolutely mandatory.
Okay. So another question is, since technology is evolving faster than the law, than the regulatory framework itself, how do we tackle these DPIs going forward?
Deal with the technology aspect first. Law will catch up.
Great. I think one of the recent events, Nama Privacy by DPO Club, I heard someone saying that since regulations are not catching up with the technologies, judiciary has to catch up, definitely.
Judiciary is the last to catch up.
Yeah.
It's the last to catch up. Don't worry about that.
Okay. Now coming on to my final question before we wrap up this discussion. So overall, where do you see India's DPIA landscape evolving over the next 2 to 3 years?
I think I think largely we are at a 10%, 20% sort of a model today, where only the 10-20% of the people have really decided that I want to do a DPIA, or even understood what the concept of DPIA is and how it will help them, right? Let alone everybody else, how it will help them. I'm hoping that this 20% number increases to at least 50% in the next 3 years. If that happens, we will not have time to do these webinars. We will have enough work for us to sit down and figure out, you as a DPO club and me as an individual, etc. We will have enough work for the next 3 years just to be able to catch up to how a DPIA study works and how the framework has grown. And mind you, in the next 3 years, technology also will improve. So when technology improves, you'll have more work that will come in, because you don't know what kind of data now you start attacking, and now you're starting to attract as well. So when you do this 50%, suddenly the 50% also will start looking like a 30% in the future, right? Because now extra amount of information would have been collected by various companies, and it might be a little too late for them to do the DPIA at that point of time. So I'm hoping that this 10-20% bracket improves and becomes 50% in the next 3 years, and hopefully it becomes a practice, a wholesome practice for all companies to follow in the future.
Sure. Thank you, Prashanth, for sharing those immensely practical insights. Any final words for our audience?
I hope all of you start going to DPO Club and us, at least to understand what you guys want to do or have to do in the future when it comes to DPDP. But please don't take DPDP lightly. I mean, I understand that there is a hesitancy for a lot of people to even approach privacy as a concept. Is very limited in India. And therefore, there is a hesitancy for people to approach DPDP the way you should. But please start taking DPDP seriously. Please start taking the law seriously. And please start questioning things as to why and how you're doing the way they are. And for data principles, whoever is on this webinar, please start questioning why this information is required to be given away. When somebody is asking you for some information, please start questioning why you want to give away that information and why that information is required. Only then will this thought process of how privacy is in India will change eventually in the future. So thank you so much, both of you, for the invitation. It was a great pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you so much for putting this conversation so beautifully and so in such a clear way. And Bhaskar, I think thank you so much for covering all the questions, almost all the questions in a rapid fire format. So I think that was a hit. We look forward to welcoming you guys, and I know there are some questions that we could not attend, so we will be reverting back. And stay tuned for such more informative webinars. Thank you, Prashanth, and thank you, Bhaskar.
Thank you. My pleasure. Thank you so much. Thanks, Bhaskar.
And